The cold came down from the mountains like a living thing. It settled into Margaret Brennan's bones the way it had every December morning for the past 30 years. 76 winters in Montana taught a woman that complaining about weather was like complaining about gravity. Pointless. The world didn't care. Her boots crunched through the snow crust on the old logging road. Same path she'd walked since Henry died. Same rhythm. Same solitude. 5:30 in the morning when the world was still dark and the only sound was her breathing and the creak of leather against frozen ground. Margaret pulled her wool coat tighter. Not Henry's coat. Never Henry's coat. That hung in the closet where it would stay until she joined him. This one was store-bought, practical, warm enough. The sun wouldn't rise for another hour. That was fine. Margaret had learned to see in the dark. She rounded the bend where the road curved past the old fence line. The metal posts leaned at angles now, rust and time doing what they always did. Margaret had watched this fence deteriorate for 3 decades. Watched a lot of things deteriorate. That's when she saw them. 2 shapes in the snow, dark against white. Wrong. Margaret stopped. Her first thought was deer. Hunters sometimes left carcasses. Her second thought was darker. The kind of thought that came from finding her son Finn on Highway 12 with his motorcycle twisted around a guardrail and his body twisted worse. She moved closer. Not deer. Men. 2 of them face down in the snow, leather jackets crusted with ice, patches on their backs, skulls, wings. Words she could read even in the pre-dawn dark. Hell's Angels. Montana chapter. Blood had frozen in dark pools around them. One wasn't moving at all. The other's hand twitched. Barely. The kind of movement that meant the body was still fighting even if the mind had given up. Margaret's medical training kicked in before her common sense could object. She dropped to her knees beside the bigger one, pressed 2 fingers against his neck. The skin was ice, but underneath there was a pulse, faint, slow, hypothermic slow, not dead, not yet. The second man groaned, his eyes cracked open, focused on nothing, then on her. Help! The word came out broken, desperate. Margaret looked at his leg. The jeans were torn, bone showed through, white against red against denim, compound fracture. Tibia and fibula both. He'd been crawling. The trail of blood in the snow told that story clear enough. She looked back at the big one. 250 pounds easy, maybe more. Unconscious, hypothermic, head wound bleeding slow and steady down the side of his face. Margaret was 76 years old, alone, no phone signal this far up the mountain, no help coming unless she went for it. And by the time she got to town and came back, these 2 would be corpses. The smart thing was to walk away, go get the sheriff. Let someone else handle this. Let someone younger and stronger and less breakable deal with Hell's Angels bleeding out on her mountain. Margaret had spent her whole life doing the smart thing. She stood up, looked at the fence line. That old metal post had finally rusted through at the base, hanging on by memory more than structure. She grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The metal screamed, gave, came free in a sheet about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. Rough edges, rust flaking off in her grip, heavy enough to matter. Margaret dragged it to the big man, positioned it beside him. Then she grabbed his jacket collar with both hands and pulled. He didn't budge. She adjusted her grip, planted her feet, pulled harder. 250 pounds of dead weight. That's what the Army taught her to call it. Dead weight, muscle and bone and mass that fought you every inch. Her shoulders screamed, her back complained, her knees made sounds that would have worried a doctor. Margaret pulled anyway. The body shifted, inch by inch, onto the metal sheet. What are you doing? The conscious one. The one with the broken leg. Saving your life. Margaret didn't look at him. Can you crawl? I don't. Can you crawl? Sharper now. The voice she'd used in the Army when soldiers were bleeding out and shock was setting in and there wasn't time for feelings. Yes. Then crawl. My cottage is 400 yards that way. You stop. You die. Understand? He understood. Margaret grabbed the edge of the metal sheet, looped a torn piece of fence wire through it, made a handle. Then she started pulling. 400 yards of frozen hell. Every step punched through the snow crust. Every pull sent fire up her spine. The metal scraped against ice. The big man's weight never got lighter, never got easier, just stayed there like a mountain she had to move 1 inch at a time. Behind her, she heard the other one crawling, grunting with pain, his broken leg dragging a red line through the white snow. But he was moving. That's what mattered. Margaret's breath came in clouds. Her hands burned from gripping the wire. Her shoulders felt like someone was driving nails through the joints. She kept pulling. 300 yards, 200, 100. The cottage appeared through the trees. Henry's cottage. Every stone laid by hand. Every beam cut and placed with the precision of a man who built things to last. The iron cross he'd made hung in the front window, catching the first hints of dawn light. Margaret pulled the metal sheet up the porch steps. The sound was terrible. Scraping wood, scraping metal, the big man's head lolling to one side. She got him to the door, pushed it open, pulled him inside onto the worn rug by the fireplace. Then she went back for the other one. He'd made it halfway up the yard, face gray with pain, teeth clenched so hard she could see the muscles jumping in his jaw. But he was still crawling. Almost there. Margaret got her hands under his arms, helped him the last 20 feet. Inside the cottage was warm. Margaret kept the fire going all winter. Habit from living alone, from not wanting to wake up frozen. She looked at her two patients, the big one still unconscious. Hypothermia, head wound, possible concussion, possible worse. The conscious one staring at her with eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. "What's your name?" Margaret was already moving, grabbing blankets, medical supplies, the kit she'd kept stocked since Finn died, since she'd learned that being prepared didn't prevent tragedy, but at least let you face it. "Devon." His voice shook. "Devon Hayes, that's Colt. Colt Shaw." "What happened?" "Black ice, we were riding back from Billings, visiting my daughter's grave, anniversary of her death." He stopped, swallowed. "Colt's bike hit the ice first, went down. Mine followed." Margaret knelt beside him, started cutting away his jeans. The bone was worse up close. Clean break but displaced. She'd need to set it before swelling made that impossible. "This is going to hurt. Everything already hurts. It's going to hurt worse." She didn't count to 3. Never did. Anticipation made pain worse. She just grabbed his ankle with one hand, his knee with the other, and pulled. Devon's scream bounced off the stone walls. His whole body convulsed. His hands clawed at the floor hard enough to leave marks. But he didn't pass out. Tough. This one was tough. Margaret worked fast, splinted the leg with boards from Henry's workshop, wrapped it tight, not pretty, functional. It would hold. Done. She moved to Colt, checked his pulse again. Still slow, checked his pupils. Uneven. Concussion, definitely. She peeled back his eyelids, checked for bleeding behind the eyes. Clear. The head wound needed stitches. She cleaned it, stitched it. 12 neat sutures that would scar, but would hold. Then she wrapped him in every blanket she owned, built up the fire until the cottage felt like summer, and waited. Devon watched her. "You're a nurse." "Was. Army, medical unit, long time ago." "That's why you helped us." Margaret looked at him. Really looked. Mid-30s, sharp eyes despite the pain, something broken behind them that had nothing to do with his leg. "I helped you because you were dying. The leather jacket doesn't change that. Most people, when they see the patches, most people didn't spend 2 years stitching gut wounds on boys who screamed for their mothers while mortars blew holes in the tent." Margaret stood, crossed to the kitchen. "You think a couple motorcycle jackets scare me?" Silence, age, fire. Then Devon laughed, short, pained, but real. "Ma'am, you're either crazy or the bravest woman I've ever met." "Both." Margaret filled a pot with broth, set it on the stove. "Now shut up and drink this when it's ready." The big man, Colt, didn't wake for another hour. When he did, he woke fighting, 1 second unconscious. The next his hand was around Margaret's throat, squeezing, hard enough to make stars explode behind her eyes, hard enough to crush her windpipe if he wanted to. Margaret didn't panic. She'd had worse. A soldier in Korea, face half gone from shrapnel. Thought she was the enemy. Thought everyone was the enemy. She talked him down while his fingers crushed her throat. This wasn't Korea, but muscle memory didn't care about time or place. You want to kill me? Her voice came out strangled, calm. Go ahead, but then you freeze to death in the next 20 minutes. Your friend dies right beside you. That what you want to hide in? The grip didn't loosen, not right away. His eyes were wild, confused, dangerous. Who the hell are you? The woman saving your life. Now let go of my throat so I can finish the job. 5 seconds. 10. His hands shook. The pressure eased, not much, but enough. Devin! His voice was gravel in a cement mixer. Where's Devin? Right here, brother. Devin dragged himself close enough to touch Colt's arm. She's good. She pulled you 400 yards through the snow. Let her work. The hand dropped. Colt stared at Margaret, at this 76-year-old woman in a worn cardigan who just stared down a man 3 times her weight without flinching. You dragged me 250 pounds of dead weight, 400 yards, uphill. Margaret rubbed her throat. She'd have bruises tomorrow. Worth it. Now drink this. She handed him a mug of broth, hot, strong, the kind that brought men back from the edge. Colt drank, his hands shook, but he drank. Why? The question was quiet, almost ashamed, because you needed help. We're Hell's Angels. I noticed the patches. People don't help Hell's Angels. Margaret poured herself coffee, sat down in Henry's old chair, the one that still smelled like him if she breathed deep enough. My son was in a motorcycle club, smaller than yours, local. He died 6 years ago on Highway 12, hit a patch of gravel going too fast. By the time I got there, it was too late. She looked at the iron cross hanging in the window. Morning light caught the metal, made it glow. I was 10 minutes too late. 10 minutes. I've thought about that every day since. What if I'd driven faster? What if I'd known the route he was taking? What if someone had found him sooner? Her voice didn't break. 76 years taught a woman how to carry grief without letting it crush her. So when I found you two on that road, bleeding and dying and 10 minutes from being gone, I didn't think about your jackets. I didn't think about what people would say. I thought about Finn, and I thought maybe this time I wouldn't be too late. The cottage was silent except for the fire crackling. Colt set down his mug. I'm sorry about your son. So am I, every damn day. Devin's voice came from the floor. My daughter, Emily, 16, drunk driver 4 years ago. I was a teacher, 10th grade English, lost everything when she died. Wife left, job ended. I don't remember how I found the club, or they found me. Just remember being so angry I wanted the world to burn. Margaret nodded. She understood that anger, that rage that made breathing feel like betrayal because they were dead and you were still here. The club give you somewhere to put it. Yeah. Did it help? Devin was quiet for a long moment. No, but it kept me alive long enough to figure out I didn't actually want to die. I just didn't know how to live anymore. The phone rang. The sound cut through the cottage like a knife. Margaret crossed to the kitchen, picked up the receiver. Margaret Caldwell, have you completely lost your mind? Helen Price, right on schedule. Town gossip, professional busybody. Good heart under the judgment, but the judgment came out first. Good morning, Helen. Don't you good morning me. I drove past your road. I saw the motorcycles. I saw the blood. And now Mary Patterson is telling me she saw you dragging someone through the snow at dawn. 2 someones. Margaret glanced at Colt and Devin. I dragged 2 someones. One was unconscious. The other had a broken leg. Dead silence. Then a strangled gasp. Hell's Angels, Montana chapter. Mary said she saw the patches. They crashed on black ice. They needed medical attention. Then call an ambulance. Nearest ambulance is 45 minutes out in good weather. This isn't good weather. They would have died. Then let them die. The words came out harsh, scared. Helen wasn't cruel, just frightened. Margaret's voice went cold. You don't mean that. Margaret, these people are dangerous. Everyone knows what they do. The drugs, the guns, everyone knows what they've heard. Nobody knows these specific men. That doesn't matter. They're Hell's Angels. So was my nephew. Margaret let that hang. Robert, my sister's boy, he patched into a club in California when he was 23. Spent 15 years riding. You know what he does now? Silence. He's a paramedic in Sacramento. Saved over 200 lives last count. Still wears his patch, still rides, still calls his brothers when he needs them. But during the day he saves lives, seems like the patch didn't stop him from being a good man. That's different. Is it? Helen didn't have an answer. Finally. I'm calling the sheriff. I expected you would. This isn't right, Maggie. Maybe not, but it's happening. Click. Margaret set down the phone, turned to face Colt and Devin. Sheriff's coming. You've got about 20 minutes. Colt was already struggling to sit up. We need to leave. You can barely stand. Doesn't matter. If the cops come, the cops are coming whether you leave or not. Margaret's voice was firm. Question is whether you're here to tell your side of the story or whether you're bleeding out in a ditch somewhere because you tried to run on injuries that'll kill you. Devin's voice was calm. She's right, Crusher. We're not going anywhere. Crusher. The road name fit. Everything about Colt Shaw was oversized. Hands, shoulders, the rage barely contained behind his eyes. You don't understand. The club will understand you crashed. Almost died. Some woman saved your lives. That's not betrayal. That's luck. Devin met his eyes. Bad luck we crashed. Good luck she found us. Colt looked at Margaret, at this tiny woman who'd pulled him through 400 yards of snow, who'd stood up to him when he'd grabbed her throat, who was standing between them and the law without a weapon or backup or any reason to care. Why Crusher? Margaret asked. Your road name, why Crusher? A shadow crossed his face. You don't want to know. I'm asking. Long pause. The fire crackled. Outside, a crow called. Because I break things. Bones, faces, whatever needs breaking. That's what I do. What I'm good at. That's what you were good at. Margaret's voice was firm. Past tense. What makes you think anything's changed? You had your hand around my throat 20 minutes ago. You could have killed me. You didn't. You were helping us. So you don't hurt people who help you. That's called a poem. That's called having lines you won't cross. That's the beginning of being something other than what you've been. Colt stared at her like she was speaking a language he didn't understand. Sirens, distant but closing fast. Devin struggled to sit up straighter. Here we go. Margaret smoothed her cardigan, checked her reflection in the window. Whatever happens, let me do the talking. Sheriff knows me. Known me for 30 years. If anyone can smooth this over, it's me. Colt snorted. Lady, nothing smooths us over. We're Hell's Angels. That's all they were going to see them in. Then maybe it's time someone showed them something different. 3 cruisers appeared through the trees. Sheriff Roy Dawkins stepped out of the first, hand resting on his holster. Behind him, 4 deputies fanned out in tactical formation. They were ready for war. Margaret stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. Morning, Roy. Dawkins stopped short. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't a 76-year-old woman in a hand-knit cardigan calmly sipping coffee. Maggie, got a report of Hell's Angels at your residence. That's correct. Are you under duress? Do I look like I'm under duress? He didn't answer. His eyes scanned the cottage windows, looking for threats, looking for weapons, looking for any excuse to go in hard. There are 2 men inside, both injured, 1 head wound, 1 broken leg. They crashed on black ice last night. I brought them here because they would have died otherwise. And you didn't think to call us. I was busy saving their lives, Roy. Paperwork could wait. Dawkins' jaw tightened. Maggie, these are Hell's Angels. You understand what that means. I understand they're human beings who needed help. They're criminals. Do you have warrants for their arrest? Pause. Not specifically for these individuals. Then they're not criminals. They're citizens who were in an accident and are currently receiving medical treatment, which last I checked isn't illegal in Montana. The deputies exchanged glances. This wasn't going how they'd expected. Dawkins took a step forward. I need to see them, verify their condition. You can come inside. Alone, your boys stay on the porch. Maggie, I see. My house, my rules. You want a warrant? Go get one. Otherwise, this is how it works. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dawkins nodded to his deputies. Stay put. He followed Margaret inside. Colt was standing when they entered. Standing despite the hypothermia, despite the head wound. He'd pulled himself upright through sheer force of will and stood facing the door like a man ready for whatever came through it. Dawkins' hand went back to his holster. Easy. Margaret stepped between them. Everyone easy. Ma'am, Colt's voice was rough. Maybe you should step aside. I'm not happy anywhere. Sheriff, this is Colt Shaw and Devin Hayes. They're my patients. They're going to be staying here until they're well enough to travel. Dawkins looked from Colt to Devin to Margaret. You've got to be kidding me. Do I look like I'm kidding? These men nearly died last night on my road. 50 feet from my property. If I hadn't found them, you'd be scraping frozen corpses off the asphalt instead of standing in my living room asking stupid questions. Dawkins flinched. In 30 years, he'd never heard Margaret Caldwell raise her voice. She wasn't raising it now. That was the terrifying part. Every word was calm, measured, absolute. I served this community for 30 years, Roy. I delivered half the babies in this town. I set bones, stitched wounds, held dying men's hands when their families couldn't reach them in time. I have earned the right to decide who stays under my roof. Maggie. And if you have a problem with that, you can explain to your mother why you arrested the woman who sat with her through 3 days of pneumonia when the hospital was full. Dead silence. Dawkins' face went through several colors. Finally, I'm going to need to take statements. Fine, after they've rested, after they've eaten, after I'm satisfied they won't keel over during your interrogation. That's not protocol. I don't give a damn about protocol. I give a damn about keeping people alive. That's been my job for 60 years and I'm not stopping now. She opened the door. You can come back tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring coffee. I'll have them ready to talk. Dawkins stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Short, surprised. Maggie Caldwell, hell of a woman. You're just figuring that out. He shook his head, walked to the door, paused. Just so you know, the club is going to come looking for them. When they do, this whole situation gets a lot more complicated. I know. And you're still doing this. Margaret looked at Colt, at Devin, at the Iron Cross catching the afternoon light. Roy, my husband used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy. It's what they do when it's hard. She met his eyes. This is hard, and I'm doing it anyway. The sheriff's cruisers disappeared down the mountain road. Margaret stood at the window watching until the last flash of red and blue faded through the trees. Then she turned back to face her two unexpected guests. Colt had collapsed back onto the sofa. The effort of standing had cost him more than he'd let show. His face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the fire's warmth. You're an idiot, Margaret said. Excuse me. Standing up like that, with hypothermia, with a head wound, you could have passed out and cracked your skull open on my floor. Had to show him I wasn't weak. There's a difference between strength and stupidity. You almost died 12 hours ago. Nobody expected you to be doing jumping jacks. Devin laughed from his spot on the floor, short, pained, but real. She's got you there, brother. Colt glared at him. Then unexpectedly his mouth twitched. Shut up, poet. Both of you shut up. Margaret disappeared into the kitchen. And eat something. I didn't drag you 400 yards through the snow just to watch you starve. She returned with 2 bowls of soup. Thick, homemade, the kind of food Colt hadn't tasted since he was 12 and his mother was still alive. He tried not to think about that. Your husband, he said between spoonfuls. The blacksmith. Did he teach you to cook like this? Other way around, Henry could build anything with his hands, but he'd burn water if you let him near a stove. Devin looked at the Iron Cross in the window. That's his work. Made it a week before he died. Said he wanted me to have something to hold on to when he was gone. It's beautiful. That's Henry. Everything he touched, he made better. Margaret sat down in the worn chair, Henry's chair. Built this cottage with his own hands. Every stone, every beam. Took him 2 years, but when he was done, it was perfect. Where is he now? Cemetery on the ridge. 3 years this spring. I'm sorry. Don't be. We had 52 good years. More than most people get. More than I deserved. Colt's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, stared at the screen. His face went tight. I need to make a call. Margaret nodded. Phone's in the kitchen. Privacy if you need it. Colt limped to the kitchen, closed the door, dialed a number he knew by heart. 2 rings. Yeah, the voice on the other end could have cut steel. Wolf, it's Crusher. Silence. The kind of silence that made Colt's stomach drop. You've been off-grid for 18 hours. Poet, too. We've had people looking for you since midnight. We crashed. Black ice on the mountain road outside Ridgewood. Poet's got a broken leg. I've got a concussion. Where are you now? A cabin. Some woman found us. She's a nurse. She patched us up. Some woman. Her name's Margaret Brennan. She's 76 years old. She dragged me 400 yards through the snow by herself because I was unconscious. More silence. Thorne Wolf Hartley didn't do silence unless he was calculating, planning, deciding how much force to use. Is she with the cops? No, she's not with anyone. She just helped us. Nobody just helps us crush her. This one did. Cole could hear Thorne breathing on the other end, could picture him in the clubhouse, 52 years old, silver streaking through his black beard, eyes that had seen everything and trusted nothing. The cops know you're there. Sheriff came by this morning. She sent him away. Sent him away. Told him to come back tomorrow. Told him we were her patients and she'd decide when we were ready to talk. For the first time, something shifted in Thorne's voice. Something that might have been curiosity. This woman. She stood up to a sheriff for 2 Hell's Angels she'd never met. Yeah. Why, I don't know. She says it's because she's a nurse, because she served in the army, because her husband would have done the same thing. Her husband's there too. Dead 3 years, so she's alone. Thorne went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, dangerous in a new way. We're coming to get you. Me and 2 others. We'll be there by tomorrow night. Colt's grip tightened on the phone. Wolf, listen to me. This woman put herself on the line for us. If the club shows up in force, it's going to look like we're taking over the town. The cops will escalate. People will get hurt. People who hurt my brothers get hurt worse. Nobody hurt us. We crashed. It was an accident. And the sheriff, the mayor, the town that's probably already calling in the feds, they're scared, that's all. They don't know us. They don't need to know us. They need to fear us. Colt closed his eyes. This was the line. The one he'd walked for 15 years. Loyalty to the club versus something he couldn't name. Something that looked like a 76-year-old woman who'd saved his life without asking for anything in return. Wolf, I'm asking you. Come yourself. Come with 1 or 2 guys. Meet this woman. See what's really happening here before you decide to burn it all down. You're asking me to trust a stranger. I'm asking you to trust me. The silence stretched so long Colt thought the line had gone dead. Then, 48 hours. I'll come myself, with 2 others. We'll see what's what. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If I don't like what I find, this town's going to remember the name Hell's Angels for the rest of their lives. Click. Colt stood in the kitchen, hands shaking, staring at the phone. Margaret was in the doorway. He's coming. Not a question. 48 hours, 3 riders, including the president. And if he doesn't like what he sees. Colt didn't answer, didn't have to. Margaret nodded slowly. Then we've got 48 hours to change his mind. The phone rang again. Margaret answered, listened. Her face went still. Went pause. How many? Longer pause. I understand. She hung up, looked at Colt, at Devin struggling to sit up in the living room. That was the elementary school. There's a bus stuck on Miller's Pass. 15 children. The storm that hit last night knocked out the road. Emergency services can't reach them. Temperatures dropping 10 degrees every hour. Devin's voice came from the doorway. How far? 20 miles north. But the highway's closed. No one can get through. Colt met her eyes. We can. You have a concussion. Devin has a broken leg. Devin stays here. I can ride. Margaret stared at this man who 12 hours ago had his hand around her throat, who now wanted to ride into a storm to save children he'd never met. Why? Because that's what you do. Colt's voice was rough. You taught me that. When someone needs help, you help. You don't ask questions. You don't calculate risks. You just help. The phone rang a third time. Margaret picked it up. Sheriff, yes, I heard. No, I have an idea. You're not going to like it, but we don't have time to argue. She looked at Colt. How fast can Hell's Angels get here? Colt pulled out his phone, started dialing. How many bikes do you need? All of them. The sound came first. Not one engine, not two. A symphony of thunder rolling down from the mountain pass. 14 motorcycles in tight formation, chrome catching the weak winter sun, leather and steel and purpose. Margaret stood on her porch watching them come. She'd heard motorcycles before. Finn's bike, that distinctive Harley rumble that used to announce his arrival home. The sound that used to make her smile. The sound that made her stomach clench now because motorcycles meant speed and black ice and bodies broken on asphalt. But she was 76 years old. She'd learned that fear was a luxury. Children were dying 20 miles north. Fear could wait. The lead bike was bigger than the others. The rider broad-shouldered, steady. He pulled into Margaret's yard and cut the engine. The silence after 14 motorcycles was deafening. The rider dismounted, 6'3", silver streaking through black hair and beard, eyes that assessed threats before most people registered danger. This was a man who'd survived things that killed weaker men. You could see it in the way he moved. Controlled, economical, nothing wasted. You're Margaret Brennan. Not a question. I am. You saved 2 of my men. I did. He studied her for a long moment. Margaret didn't flinch. She'd stared down worse than bikers. She'd held the intestines of 19-year-old boys inside their bodies while surgeons ran. She'd counted dead soldiers while their friends screamed. A man on a motorcycle didn't rate. Why? Same question everyone asked. Like helping people who were dying needed justification. Because they needed saving. Because I could. Because that's who I am. The man's eyes moved to the cottage, to the windows where Colt was visible, to the iron cross hanging and catching light. Something shifted in his expression. Your husband made that cross. Not a question this time either. Henry was a blacksmith, worked metal his whole life. I knew a blacksmith once, a man named Henry Dawes, foster father for about 8 months before the state moved me again. He made me a knife, told me that iron had to go through fire to become strong. Margaret looked at this dangerous man standing in her yard. Henry used to say the same thing, said fire doesn't destroy, it reveals, burns away impurities and shows what was always there. Your Henry and mine would have gotten along. Probably. The moment stretched. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. Something else, recognition maybe. The man extended his hand. Thorne Hartley, most people call me Wolf. Margaret took it. His grip was careful, like he was afraid of breaking her, like he'd broken things before and learned to be gentle. You came fast. My brothers needed me. That's what family does. Behind him, the other riders were dismounting. Colt appeared in the cottage doorway, still pale, still unsteady, but upright. Wolf. Crusher. Thorne's eyes scanned him. Medical assessment. Threat evaluation. You look like hell. Feel worse. Devin. Inside, legs broken. He can't ride. Thorne nodded, then he turned back to Margaret. I'm told there's a problem that needs solving. School bus stuck on Miller's Pass, 15 children, temperature dropping, emergency services can't reach them in time. How long? They've been there 4 hours. We've got maybe 2 hours before hypothermia sets in. Less if the bus goes over the edge. Over the edge. It's hanging, rear wheels over a ravine, drivers terrified to move. Thorne's jaw tightened. He looked at his 14 riders, at men who'd come hundreds of miles because their brothers needed them, men whose society called criminals, men who'd made hard choices in harder lives. Everyone who can ride, we go, now. One of the riders, younger, maybe 30, stepped forward. Wolf, this isn't our problem. 15 kids about to freeze to death isn't our problem. It's not club business. Thorne's voice went cold. I'm making it club business. You got an issue with that? The young rider looked at the others, found no support. No issue, boss. Good, mount up. Margaret walked down the porch steps. I'm coming with you. Every head turned, Thorne frowned. Ma'am, with respect, you're 76 years old. And I just dragged a 250-pound man 400 yards through snow. I'm a medic, combat trained. Those children are going to need medical attention. You need me. The ride up there. I've ridden motorcycles before. My son Finn was in a club. I rode with him plenty. When was the last time? 6 years ago, the day he died. The words hung in the cold air. Thorne studied her. This tiny woman in a wool coat who'd saved his brothers, who'd stood up to law enforcement, who now wanted to ride into a storm to save children she'd never met. He made a decision. You ride with me. You do exactly what I say. No arguments, no heroics. Understood. Understood. Colt stepped forward. I'm coming too. You have a concussion. I can ride. Crusher. Those are kids, Wolf. Kids. You think I'm staying here while children freeze? The two men stared at each other. President and sergeant at arms, leaders who'd bled together, fought together, buried brothers together. Fine, but if you fall off that bike, I'm leaving you in the snow. Colt almost smiled. Fair enough. Devon appeared in the doorway, leaning heavy on a crutch Margaret had improvised from a broom handle. Bring them home safe. That's the plan, brother. And Wolf, Devon's voice was quiet, serious. Thank you for coming, for this. Thorne nodded once. Then he turned to his riders. Listen up. We've got 15 children stuck on Miller's Pass. The road's closed. Weather's deteriorating. We're their only chance. I don't care if you've got warrants. I don't care if you've got history in this town. Right now, we're first responders. We save those kids. Everything else is secondary. Clear. Clear, boss. Then let's ride. Margaret had forgotten what it felt like. The vibration of the engine between her legs. The wind cutting through her coat. The world blurring past at speeds that made her stomach clench. Her arms wrapped around Thorne's waist. Holding on. Trusting a stranger with her life because children needed help and fear was a luxury. The last time she'd been on a motorcycle, Finn was driving. Taking her to see the autumn leaves. Riding careful because she was his mother and he loved her. Going slow on the curves. Stopping to let her catch her breath. 3 weeks later, he was dead on Highway 12. Now she was riding faster than Finn ever drove. With a man she'd met 20 minutes ago. Racing toward children who might already be dead. The irony wasn't lost on her. The formation was tight. Thorne leading, 6 bikes on each side. Colt bringing up the rear. They moved like a military unit. Practiced. Coordinated. When Thorne signaled, they shifted. When he slowed, they slowed. Perfect synchronization. These weren't thugs. These were soldiers. The road got worse. Ice under fresh snow. Black ice underneath. The kind that killed Finn. The kind that put Colt and Devon face down in the snow. The bikes didn't slow. Margaret's hands gripped tighter. Thorne felt it. His hand came down, patted hers once. Reassurance, then back to the handlebars. They rode. Miller's Pass appeared through the trees. Margaret's stomach dropped. The bus was worse than she'd imagined. Yellow metal tilted at an angle that defied physics. Rear wheels over empty air. Front wheels on pavement, but barely. The whole thing balanced on a fulcrum that could shift any second. And inside, faces pressed against frosted windows. Children. Small. Terrified. Alive. Thorne stopped the bike. Margaret climbed off. Her legs shook. Age, cold, fear. Didn't matter. She walked toward the bus on steady feet because children were watching, and children needed to see strength, not weakness. A woman's face appeared in the driver's window. Young, 25 maybe. Tears frozen on her cheeks, eyes wide with terror that had gone past panic into something worse. Resignation. She thought they were going to die. Thorne walked to the window. His voice was calm, level. The voice of someone who'd talked people down from ledges before. My name is Thorne. We're here to help. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I'm the driver. How many people on board, Sarah? 15 children, 2 teachers, one of the teachers. Patricia. She hit her head when we crashed. I don't know if she's okay. We're going to get you out, all of you, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that? The bus is going to fall. Not if we work fast. Is the door jammed? Yes, impact bent the frame. Thorne turned, scanned the bus. Back windows cracked. We can break through there. One of the riders, broad, muscled, tattoos covering both arms. I can punch through. Do it. Careful, don't shift the weight. The rider. Margaret heard someone call him Axel, moved to the back of the bus, tested the window, then hit it with his elbow. Once, twice, glass shattered. Cold air rushed in. Children screamed. Margaret was already moving. Let me through. The riders parted. Margaret climbed onto Axel's linked hands. He boosted her up. She grabbed the window frame, felt the glass cut her palm, ignored it, pulled herself through. Inside the bus was chaos. 15 small faces turned to her, eyes wide, some crying, some too scared to cry. Two teachers, Sarah at the wheel, white-knuckling the steering wheel, like it was the only thing keeping them alive. Patricia slumped in the first row, blood matting her gray hair. My name is Margaret. Her voice cut through the panic. Calm, authoritative. The voice she'd used in the army when soldiers were dying and someone needed to be in charge. I'm a nurse. Those men outside are going to help us. But I need you to be brave. Can you do that? A little girl in the front row, 7 years old, pigtails, missing front teeth, raised her hand like she was in class. Are they bad guys? They look scary. Margaret knelt down to her level, ignored the bus groaning, ignored the angle that made her stomach flip. What's your name, sweetheart? Pearl. Pearl, those men rode through a storm to save you. They came as fast as they could. Does that sound like something bad guys would do? Pearl thought about it, serious, considering. No. Then let's trust them. Okay. Okay, Margaret moved to Patricia, checked her pupils. Uneven. Concussion definitely. Possible skull fracture. The woman's breathing was shallow. Kin pale, shock setting in. Patricia, can you hear me? The teacher's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. The children. Safe, I'm going to get everyone out. But I need you to stay still. Don't move your head. Understand, hurts. I know, stay still. Help is coming. Margaret moved back to the window. Thorne was there. We need to evacuate, fast. The bus won't hold. How long? 30 minutes, maybe less. Then we move. Teacher first, she's injured. Then the children, smallest to largest. You stabilize her head while we lift her out. They worked like a machine. Margaret held Patricia's head and neck stable. Axel and another rider, stocky, quiet, named himself Hammer, reached through the window, grabbed Patricia under the arms, lifted her with a gentleness that contradicted their size, passed her out to waiting hands. Then the children. Pearl went first. Margaret carried her to the window. The little girl's arms wrapped around her neck, tight, trusting. You're very brave, Pearl. Are you coming too? Right behind you, sweetheart. Thorne's hands appeared at the window. Margaret lifted Pearl. Thorne took her weight like she weighed nothing. Passed her down to Colt, who was standing despite his concussion, despite the head wound, standing because children needed him. One by one, the children came out. A boy, 10 maybe, refused to leave without his younger brother. I'm not going without Jake. He's scared. Then take Jake's hand. Brothers stick together. They went together, twin girls, identical, pink coats, held hands and jumped into Thorne's arms at the same time, giggling despite the terror, despite everything. You're strong, one of them said. You're brave. Thorne replied, that's stronger. 14 children out, one left. The bus shifted. Metal screamed. The angle changed. Steeper. Wrong. Margaret grabbed the seats, held on, looked toward the back. The last child, a boy, 7 years old, dark hair, terrified eyes. He'd wedged himself under a seat and refused to come out. Tyler. Sarah, the driver's voice was strained. Tyler, you have to come out. I can't. Margaret crawled toward him. Every movement made the bus groan, made the metal shift. Tyler, my name is Margaret. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. You are terrified, but I need you to be brave for just one more minute. Can you do that? I want my mom. Your mom wants you too. She's waiting. She's praying you're safe. The only way to get to her is to come with me. Tyler's sobs quieted, slowly, painfully slowly. Margaret extended her hand. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. Small fingers touched hers. Tyler crawled out from under the seat. Margaret scooped him up, held him tight. Good boy. Such a good, brave boy. She carried him to the window. The bus lurched again. Harder this time. The sound of metal tearing. Go, Thorne's voice. Now, Margaret pushed Tyler through the window. Thorne grabbed him, pulled him free. Then he reached back for Margaret. Your turn. Margaret dove through head first. Felt hands grab her coat, pull her. The glass cut her arms, her legs. Didn't matter. Her feet cleared the window just as the bus made a sound like the world ending. Metal shrieking, ground giving way, the yellow shell sliding backward. Rear wheels first, then the whole body, tumbling over the edge into the ravine below. The crash echoed through the mountains. Then silence. Margaret lay in the snow, Thorne's arms around her, both of them breathing hard, staring at the empty space where the bus had been. Close. Thorne's voice was rough. Too close. He helped her up. Margaret looked around. 15 children, wrapped in leather jackets that dwarfed them, held by men with tattooed arms and scarred knuckles. Men who society called criminals. Men who'd just risked their lives for strangers. Sarah, the driver, was crying. Patricia was conscious, being tended by Hammer, who apparently had medical training nobody mentioned. And Pearl. Little Pearl with her pigtails. She ran to Margaret, threw small arms around her waist. You saved us. You and the motorcycle men. Margaret knelt down, hugged her back. We all saved each other, sweetheart. That's how it works. The ride back to Ridgewood took twice as long. Each motorcycle carried a child, the smallest one sandwiched between riders for warmth. Sarah and Patricia rode with Hammer and Axel, the injured teacher strapped in carefully. Secured, Margaret rode with Thorne again. But this time she wasn't afraid. She could feel him breathing, steady, strong. This man who'd come because his brothers called, who'd led 14 riders into a storm because children needed help. Thank you. She said it quiet enough that only he could hear over the engine. For what? For coming, for trusting me, for being who you are. Thorne was quiet for a moment. I spent my whole life being told who I was. Orphan, foster kid, delinquent, criminal, outlaw. Nobody ever asked who I wanted to be. Who do you want to be? I don't know, but after today, after this, maybe something different than what I've been. They rode in silence after that. Ridgewood appeared through the trees, but it wasn't the same town they'd left. The streets were lined with people, parents, desperate, searching faces for their children, mothers who'd been crying for hours, fathers who'd been pacing, calling anyone who might know something, praying to gods they'd stop believing in. The motorcycles rolled down Main Street, and the screaming started. Not fear, joy, relief. Mothers running into the street, fathers sprinting toward bikes, parents grabbing children, sobbing, holding them, refusing to let go. Pearl's father, big man, flannel shirt, hands that looked like they'd never been soft. He grabbed his daughter from Colt's bike, dropped to his knees, held her like she was made of glass. Thank you. The words came out broken. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He looked up at Colt, at this man covered in tattoos, this sergeant-at-arms for a motorcycle club, this stranger who'd ridden into a storm, and he reached out his hand. Colt stared at it, like it was a trap, like kindness was something dangerous. Then he took it. Just glad we got there in time. Sarah's mother appeared, threw arms around her daughter, around the Hells Angels who'd carried her home. Didn't care about the patches, didn't care about the reputation. Her baby was alive. Mayor Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face pale, hands shaking. He stopped in front of Thorne. I don't understand. You could have left. You could have let them die. Why? Thorne looked at the mayor, at this politician who'd called an emergency meeting yesterday, who'd talked about public safety threats and criminal elements and the need for protection. Why did we help? Thorne's voice carried. The crowd went quiet. Because that's what you do when children are in danger. You help. You don't ask questions. You don't calculate risks. You help. He stepped closer to the mayor. Not threatening, but absolute. We're not the monsters you think we are. We're men who made hard choices because the world didn't give us better options. But we're also men who protect the weak, who stand up when others won't. Maybe it's time you saw that. Sheriff Dawkins appeared, walked straight to Thorne, extended his hand. I was wrong about you, about all of you. I'm sorry. Thorne looked at the hand, at this lawman who yesterday had shown up with tactical gear and barely concealed contempt. He took it. Apology accepted. The crowd erupted. Not fear this time. Gratitude. Parents shaking hands with bikers. Children hugging men in leather. A town that had locked its doors yesterday, opening its arms today. Margaret stood at the edge of it all, watching. Her hand hurt where the glass had cut it. Her body ached from the ride. Her heart felt too big for her chest. Pearl found her in the crowd, ran to her, launched herself into Margaret's arms with the confidence of a child who'd learned that strangers could be heroes. Mrs. Caldwell, we're having dinner at the community center. Everyone, will you come, please? I don't know, sweetheart. I'm pretty tired. Please, I want to show everyone the lady who saved us. How could she say no to that? The community center filled fast. Someone had brought casseroles. Someone else had brought coffee. Thermoses appeared from nowhere and everywhere. The church ladies, the volunteer fire department, the mayor's office, everyone contributing what they had. The 15 children sat in the center, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by parents who couldn't stop touching them, making sure they were real, making sure they were safe, and around the edges, 14 Hell's Angels, standing, unsure, like they'd stumbled into a world they didn't understand. Margaret watched Colt, still pale from the concussion, being hugged by Tyler's mother. The woman couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop thanking him. Watched Axel, massive, intimidating, kneeling down to talk to the twins, making them laugh with some joke Margaret couldn't hear. Watched Hammer, quiet, careful, checking Patricia's pupils one more time, making sure the concussion hadn't worsened. And Thorne, standing alone, watching his brothers integrate into a community that had feared them hours ago. Margaret walked to him. Hell of a day. He looked at her. Something had changed in his eyes. The calculation was still there, the wariness, but underneath something new, something that looked almost like hope. What happened today? His voice was quiet. That's who we could be. What do you mean? I mean protection instead of threats, service instead of taking, building instead of destroying. Margaret understood. You're talking about changing the club. I'm talking about having a future that doesn't end in prison or graves. He turned to face her fully. The other chapters won't accept this. They'll say we've gone soft, betrayed what we are. What are you, That's what I'm trying to figure out. He reached into his jacket, pulled out something small, a patch, Hell's Angels colors, skull and wings, but different. In the center, embroidered in silver thread, an iron cross. I had this made this morning before we rode out. Thorne's voice was rough. Your husband's cross, the one he made, the one that means fire reveals instead of destroys. I want that to be our symbol, our reminder. He held it out to her. Will you help us, teach us how to be different? Margaret looked at the patch, at 15 children who'd almost died, at 14 men who'd saved them, at a town transformed. I don't know the first thing about motorcycle clubs. You know about people, about redemption, about second chances. That's all we need. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. Margaret took the patch, felt the weight of it, the responsibility. I have one condition. Name it. That big one, Colt. I saw him struggling to read the signs on the way here. He's faking it. Has been for years, probably. Thorne's eyebrows rose. You caught that. I was a teacher before I was a nurse. I know the signs. He's illiterate or close to it. If you want to transform, really transform, it starts with teaching your brothers they're worth more than what the world told them they were. You want to teach Crusher to read. I want to teach all of them. Anyone who needs it, reading, writing, GED programs, job skills, whatever they need to become who they could be. Thorne stared at her. This 76-year-old woman who'd saved his brothers, ridden into a storm, climbed into a bus that was falling apart, and now wanted to teach Hell's Angels to read. He started laughing. Deep, real. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere genuine. Deal. You teach them. We'll learn, and maybe we become something worth being. He extended his hand. Margaret took it. Around them, the community center buzzed with life. Children laughing, parents grateful, a town learning that fear and understanding were choices, that monsters and heroes sometimes wore the same jacket. Pearl appeared at Margaret's elbow, small hand tugging her sleeve. "Mrs. Caldwell, I drew you a picture." "Did you, sweetheart?" Pearl thrust a piece of paper into her hands. Crayon, crude, the kind of art only a 7-year-old could make. It showed a woman in a blue dress, surrounded by men on motorcycles. They were all wearing capes. And at the bottom, in large, uneven letters, Pearl had written, "My heroes." Margaret's eyes burned. She knelt down, hugged Pearl tight. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." "You're welcome. You're the bravest person I know." Not the strongest. Not the smartest. The bravest. Coming from a child who'd faced death and survived. That meant something. Margaret stood, looked at Thorne, at the patch in her hand, at the future spreading out like Montana sky. "When do we start?" "How about tomorrow?" Tomorrow works. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and red and purple. The storm had passed. The air was cold but clear, and somewhere on a mountain road, 2 broken motorcycles lay in the snow. Evidence of how this had all started. With a crash, with near death, with an old woman who refused to walk away. But that was yesterday. Tomorrow was something new. Tomorrow was 14 Hell's Angels learning to read. Tomorrow was a town learning that redemption wasn't just for the religious. Tomorrow was proof that fire didn't destroy. It revealed. And what Margaret Brennan had revealed in Thorne Hartley and his brothers was worth building on, worth fighting for, worth saving. Just like 15 children on Miller's Pass. Just like 2 men bleeding in the snow. Just like everyone who'd ever been written off as worthless learning they were worth everything. The night settled over Ridgewood, but for the first time and longer than anyone could remember. It felt like hope. 6 months changed everything. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the Montana mountains gold. Same view she'd watched for 30 years. Same coffee mug Henry had made in his forge. Same worn chair by the table. But different too, because at 7 in the morning, her cottage wasn't empty anymore. The knock came right on schedule. 3 raps. Polite. Respectful. "Come in, Colt." The door opened. 250 pounds of tattooed muscle ducked through the frame. Colt Shaw, Crusher, Sergeant-at-Arms for the Hells Angels Montana chapter, carrying a backpack that looked small in his massive hands. "Morning, Mrs. Brennan." "Morning. Coffee's on. Breakfast is ready." She'd learned his routine fast. Colt arrived at 7 every morning except Sundays. Ate whatever she put in front of him. Then they worked until 9, reading, writing. The basics he should have learned at 6 years old instead of at 35. He poured coffee, sat down at the table, pulled out his primer. 6 months ago, he couldn't read a street sign, could barely write his name. 35 years of faking it, of memorizing, of pretending, of shame so deep it had roots in his bones. Now he could read. Not well, not fast, but he could sound out words, could write sentences that made sense, could pick up a newspaper and understand most of what was printed. Margaret had seen men come back from worse. "You finished the chapter I assigned." Colt nodded, opened the book. "To Kill a Mockingbird," chapter 12. His finger traced under the words, sounding them out, stopping when he didn't know something, but pushing through, refusing to quit. "Calpurnia." Calpurnia wore her stiffest starched apron. He looked up. "That right. Perfect." Something crossed his face. Pride, maybe. Or relief. Hard to tell with Colt. He'd spent decades building walls. Teaching him to read was easy compared to teaching him to feel. They worked through the chapter. Slow. Careful. When Colt stumbled, Margaret corrected gently. When he got frustrated, she reminded him how far he'd come. 6 months ago, you couldn't read Cat. Now you're reading Harper Lee. That's progress. Still can't read fast as a 10-year-old. You're not competing with 10-year-olds. You're competing with who you were yesterday. And yesterday's Colt couldn't read that whole paragraph without stopping. Today's Colt just did. He smiled, rare, genuine, the kind that made him look younger. Devin's coming by later. Wants your opinion on his lesson plans. Margaret poured more coffee. How's teaching going? Good. Kids love him. Principal said enrollment in English is up 20% since he started. Turns out having a teacher who actually gives a damn makes a difference. Devin Hayes, poet, former teacher who'd lost everything when his daughter died. He'd gotten his certification reinstated 4 months ago. Now he taught at Ridgewood High, same school his daughter would have attended. Redemption looked different for everyone. And Thorne, Colt's expression shifted, complicated. Busy, he's on the phone with Oregon and Wyoming chapters every night, trying to convince them to adopt the model. How's that going? Mixed. Some chapters are interested, some think we've gone soft, lost our edge. What do you think? Colt looked at the book in his hands, at words he could finally read, at a future he could finally imagine. I think we found something worth more than an edge. The phone rang. Margaret answered. Mrs. Brennan, this is Governor Wilson's office calling. Margaret's eyebrows rose. The governor of Montana. Yes, ma'am. The governor would like to speak with you about a community service recognition event. Would you be available next Tuesday at 2? I suppose so. Excellent. We'll send the details. Have a wonderful day. Margaret hung up, looked at Colt, who was grinning. Governor wants to give you a medal, doesn't she? Apparently. You going to accept? Don't have much choice, do I? You saved 15 kids and transformed a motorcycle club. Yeah, you're taking the medal. Margaret shook her head, but she was smiling. The transformation spread faster than anyone expected. By spring, 3 more chapters had adopted what they were calling the Ridgewood model. Community patrols, emergency response teams, partnerships with local law enforcement. Hells Angels in Oregon delivered groceries to shut-ins. Hells Angels in Wyoming ran a youth mentorship program. Hells Angels in Northern California partnered with fire departments for wilderness rescue. The national news picked it up, called it unprecedented, called it revolutionary, called it proof that even the hardest men could change. Thorne hated the attention, but he used it. Every interview he gave, he wore the patch, skull and wings, an iron cross in the center. Every time a reporter asked about the transformation, he pointed at Margaret. She showed us who we could be. We just had to be brave enough to become it. The calls started coming. Other chapters, other clubs, men who'd spent their lives being told they were worthless, wanting to know if redemption was real. Thorne sent them all to Margaret. And Margaret, 76 years old, widow, combat medic, mother who'd buried her son. She sat in her cottage and talked to broken men about second chances. It's never too late, she told them. All of them. As long as you're breathing, it's not too late to become who you were meant to be. Some believed her, some didn't, but enough did that the movement kept growing. By summer, it was 6 chapters. By fall, it was 12. By the anniversary of the bus rescue, it was 17. And the town of Ridgewood, population 8,000, middle of nowhere, Montana, they decided to build something. Mayor Whitmore called Margaret on a Tuesday in October. Mrs. Brennan, the town council met last night. We voted unanimously. We want to build a community center, a place for programs, classes, events, everything we should have built years ago. That's wonderful, David. We want to name it after you. Margaret went still. Excuse me, the Margaret Brennan Community Center. You have given this town more than we can repay. This is our way of saying thank you. I don't need thanks. We know. That's why you deserve it. She tried to argue, tried to refuse, but the mayor had learned stubbornness from watching her these past months. The center would be built. It would bear her name, whether she liked it or not. Margaret hung up the phone and cried, not from grief, from something else, something that felt like purpose, like proof that 60 years of helping people hadn't been wasted. Henry's iron cross caught the afternoon light in the window. You'd be proud, she whispered to the empty cottage, of all of this, of them. of what they're becoming. The cross didn't answer, but she felt Henry anyway, in the stones he'd laid, in the beams he'd cut, in the life they'd built together. He was here. He'd always be here. And now his symbol, his iron cross, it was helping broken men become whole. That was legacy. That was love that outlasted death. That was enough. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for exactly 1 year after the bus rescue. Margaret woke that morning to her cottage full of people. Colt in the kitchen making breakfast. Devin at the table reviewing his speech. Thorne on the porch talking quietly on the phone. Coordinating, planning, leading. They'd become family, not the family she'd been born into, not the family she'd married into, but family nonetheless. You ready for today, Mrs. Brennan? Devin looked up from his notes. As ready as I'll ever be. Governors coming, state senators, media from 3 states. This is big. Too big. Thorne stepped inside. Nothing's too big for the woman who started all this. I didn't start anything. I just helped 2 men who were dying and saved 15 children and taught half a motorcycle club to read and showed an entire organization what redemption looked like. Margaret waved them off, but she was smiling. The Margaret Brennan Community Center sat at the heart of Ridgewood. New construction, clean lines, built by Hell's Angels volunteers from 16 different chapters. Every nail hammered by hands that once held weapons. Every board placed by men who'd learned that building was better than destroying. Above the entrance in letters 2 feet tall, Margaret Brennan Community Center. Margaret stood looking at it. 76 years old, worn wool coat, sensible boots, the least remarkable woman in a crowd of hundreds, and the most important. The crowd filled the main hall and spilled onto the street. News vans, cameras, reporters, the governor in the front row beside Mayor Whitmore and Sheriff Dawkins, and in formation along the walls, 27 Hell's Angels from 12 different chapters, wearing their colors, wearing their pride, wearing the iron cross that meant they'd chosen transformation. Thorne spoke first. He stood at the podium, 52 years old, silver beard, eyes that had seen everything and learned to hope anyway. 1 year ago, I rode into this town expecting a fight. I came to collect my brothers, to remind everyone why they should fear us. His voice carried, strong, clear. Instead, I found a woman who refused to be afraid, who looked past our leather and our patches and our reputation, who saw human beings who needed help, and who helped us even though she had every reason not to. He paused, let that settle. That woman changed everything. She didn't just save Colt and Devin. She saved all of us. She showed us we could be more than what the world expected, that we could protect instead of threaten, serve instead of take, build instead of destroy. He gestured to the building around them. This center, every board was hammered by hands that once held weapons, every nail driven by men who once thought violence was the only language they knew. We built this with our own sweat, our own labor, our own redemption. He turned to face Margaret, and we named it after the woman who taught us how. The applause was deafening. Margaret's hands shook. Colt appeared at her elbow, helped her to the stage. She stood at the podium, looked out at hundreds of faces, cameras, attention she'd never wanted. But children were watching, and children needed to see that one person could change the world. I don't like attention. Her voice was quiet, but microphones carried it. I've spent my life trying to avoid being the center of anything. I'm a nurse. Nurses work behind the scenes. We fix what's broken and move on. She paused, gathered herself. But 1 year ago, something broke that I couldn't fix with bandages. 2 men lay dying on a mountain road. All I could do was drag them to safety and pray. Her eyes found Colt in the crowd. I didn't know their names, didn't know their stories, didn't know that one of them had spent his childhood in foster care, waiting for someone to protect him. Didn't know the other had lost a daughter and spent years trying to outrun his grief. Her eyes found Devin. All I knew was they were human beings who needed help, and that's enough. That should always be enough. She looked at the 27 Hell's Angels standing at attention. These men have been called criminals, outlaws, threats, and some of that was earned. Some of them have done things they're not proud of, things that hurt people, things that left scars. Her voice grew fierce. But that's not who they are. That's who they were, and there's a difference that matters more than anything else in this world. She held up Henry's iron cross, the one she'd carried in her pocket, the one that had started everything. My husband made this the week before he died. He was a blacksmith. He spent 50 years turning raw metal into something beautiful. He used to say that fire doesn't destroy, it reveals, burns away the impurities and shows what was always there. She looked at Thorne. I've watched these men go through fire, real fire, the fire of facing who they were and choosing to become something different. And I've seen what the fire revealed. She smiled. Heroes, every single one of them. Heroes who protect the weak. Heroes who stand up when others won't. Heroes who prove every day that redemption isn't just possible. It's happening. Right here, right now, in this town, in this building, in these hearts. The crowd rose, standing ovation. Margaret stood there, small, quiet, overwhelmed. Governor Patricia Wilson approached the stage, a medal in her hands, gold, heavy, inscribed with words Margaret couldn't read through the tears. Margaret Brennan, on behalf of the state of Montana, I present you with the Governor's Medal for Distinguished Community Service. Your compassion has transformed not just one town, but an entire movement. Your courage has shown us all that the greatest strength lies not in violence, but in the willingness to see the humanity in everyone. She placed the medal around Margaret's neck. Thank you for changing the world, dude. But Margaret wasn't done. I have one more thing. She looked at Colt. Colt Shaw, would you come up here, please? Colt froze, looked at Thorne, who nodded, walked to the stage on unsteady legs. Margaret handed him a book. To Kill a Mockingbird, worn, dog-eared. The copy they'd been reading together for 6 months. Read chapter 12, page 133, out loud. Colt stared at the book, at the crowd, at cameras and reporters and hundreds of people waiting. Mrs. Brennan, I can't. Yes, you can. Show them what 6 months of work looks like. Show them what redemption sounds like. Colt opened the book. His hands shook. He found the page, cleared his throat. Chapter 12. Calpurnia wore her stiffest, starched apron. His voice was rough, uncertain, but he kept going. She carried a tray of Charlotte. She opened the front door and shut it behind us. He stumbled on a word, sounded it out, kept going. I felt her hand on my shoulder. The man Atticus had pointed out to me earlier was sitting alone at a table. 3 paragraphs, then 5, then a full page. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire hall. Colt stood there, 35 years old, 250 pounds of muscle and ink, crying openly, because for the first time in his life, he'd read, really read, in front of people. And nobody had laughed. Nobody had called him stupid. They'd called him brave. Margaret hugged him. Proud of you, son. I couldn't have done it without you. You did all the work. I just opened the door. Devin stepped forward, took the microphone. I have an announcement. His voice cracked. My wife and I, we reconciled 6 months ago. She's pregnant. The baby's due in March. Applause, congratulations. We're naming her Margaret, after the woman who gave me back my life. The crowd erupted again. And Pearl, 7-year-old Pearl Porter, she ran onto the stage, pigtails bouncing, carrying a poster board. Mrs. Caldwell, I made you something. The drawing was bigger this time, more detailed, but the same theme. A woman in a blue dress, surrounded by men on motorcycles, all of them wearing capes, flying, saving people. And at the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, my heroes forever. Margaret knelt down, hugged Pearl, let the tears come. Thank you, sweetheart. You're welcome. You're still the bravest person I know. The ceremony lasted another hour. Speeches, thanks, recognition. But Margaret barely heard it. She was watching Colt talk to a reporter about learning to read, watching Devin accept congratulations about the baby, watching Thorne coordinate with chapter presidents about expansion, watching broken men become whole. That was the real ceremony. That was the real recognition. The rest was just noise. Spring came to Montana the way it always did. Sudden, violent, snow melting into mud, rivers swelling, the whole world turning green in the space of a week. Margaret walked her mountain road at dawn, same as always, 81 years old, soon to be 82. Her knees complained, her back ached, but she walked, because movement was life. Because routine was comfort. Because Henry had walked this road with her for 48 years, and now she walked it alone, but not lonely. Never lonely. Not anymore. The cottage was quiet when she returned. She made coffee, sat in Henry's chair, looked at the iron cross in the window. Good life, she said to the empty room, to Henry, to Finn, to everyone she'd loved and lost. You'd be proud of what we built. She felt tired, more tired than usual. The kind of tired that came from bones, from cells, from a body that had worked hard for 76 years and was ready to rest. Margaret drank her coffee, watched the sunrise, thought about Colt reading Shakespeare now, Devon teaching summer classes, Thorne planning the expansion to 30 more chapters, thought about a movement she'd started by dragging two men through snow. Not bad for a Tuesday morning. She stood to make breakfast. The world tilted. Just a little. Just enough. Margaret sat back down. Not yet, she whispered. Little more time. But time didn't negotiate. She made it to her bedroom, lay down on the quilt she and Henry had used for 50 years, looked at his picture on the nightstand. Okay, she said. I'm ready. She closed her eyes. When Colt arrived at 7 with his backpack full of books, he found her there. Peaceful, still, gone. The iron cross on the nightstand beside her, catching morning light one last time. He stood in the doorway, this massive man who'd learned to read, who'd learned to cry, who'd learned that being strong meant knowing when to be gentle. He called Thorne, then Devon, then Sheriff Dawkins. Then he sat beside her bed and wept. The funeral filled the Margaret Brennan Community Centers that bore her name. But it wasn't enough, wasn't close. So they moved outside, set up speakers, chairs, made room for everyone who needed to say goodbye. 412 Hells Angels came from 37 chapters across 12 states. They rode in formation, engines silent as they entered town. Leather and chrome and the iron cross patch on every cut. They stood in perfect lines, military precision, heads bowed, honoring the woman who'd shown them who they could be. The town came too, all 8,000 residents. The children Pearl had saved, the parents, the teachers, the mayor and the sheriff, and the governor herself, everyone who'd been touched by Margaret Brennan, who'd been saved by her, who'd been changed by her. Thorne gave the eulogy. He stood at the podium, 52 years old, silver beard wet with tears, voice steady despite the grief. Margaret Brennan was not a Hell's Angel. She was something better. She was the person who reminded us what we could be, who looked at men everyone else had written off and saw heroes waiting to emerge, who taught us that fire doesn't destroy, it reveals. His voice broke, he breathed, continued. She called us her sons, all of us. Every man who ever wore this patch and chose to use it for good, and we called her something too, even if we never said it out loud. He looked at the casket draped in Hell's Angels colors and the Iron Cross. We called her Mom, and she was. She was the mother who saw us, who believed in us, who taught us we were worth saving. He stepped down, couldn't continue. Colt spoke next, 35 years old, reading at an 8th grade level now, working toward his GED, applying for EMT certification. 6 months ago, I couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't imagine a future that was anything other than violence and loss. He held up the book, To Kill a Mockingbird. Then a 76-year-old woman told me I was worth teaching, worth saving, worth becoming something better than what I'd been. His voice was rough, raw. Every day I'm going to read. Every day until I've read every book she ever recommended. And then I'm going to start over and read them all again. He pressed the book to his chest, because she taught me that it's never too late, that redemption is real, that broken men can become whole if someone believes in them enough to try. Devon was last, 37 years old, English department chair at Ridgewood High, married, baby daughter 2 weeks old, named Margaret. I was a teacher once. Then I lost everything and forgot how to teach, forgot how to hope, forgot how to live. He looked at the crowd, at his students, at his wife holding their daughter. Maggie Brennan gave me back my classroom, gave me back my purpose, gave me back my life. Every student I teach, every book I share, every life I touch. That's her legacy. That's what she built. He took a breath. The woman I love is here today. Our daughter, Margaret Rose Hayes, 2 weeks old. Every time I call my daughter's name, I'll remember the woman who made it all possible. The service ended with Amazing Grace, sung by the community choir, led by Pearl Porter, 8 years old now, voice clear and strong. 412 motorcycles followed the hearse up the mountain road, to the cemetery where Henry waited, where Finn waited, where Margaret Brennan would rest beside the men she'd loved. The headstone was simple, Irish granite, strong. Margaret Brennan, 1943 to 2025. She opened doors, she saved us all. Below the words, engraved deep and permanent, an iron cross. Thorne was the last to leave. He stood at the grave as the sun set, his hand resting on the cold stone. I'll take care of them, he said. All of them. The club, the movement, everything you built. I'll protect it with my life. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the patch, the original one he'd given her a year ago, worn soft with handling. He placed it on the grave. Thank you, Mom, for everything. Then he walked back to his motorcycle, started the engine, looked back one last time. Rest now. You've earned it. The bike roared to life. And Thorne rode down the mountain toward Ridgewood, toward the movement that would carry Margaret Brennan's name for generations. The world kept turning. Colt became director of the Hells Angels Emergency Response Program, trained teams across the country, saved 200 lives in 3 years, learned to read at a 10th grade level, started teaching other illiterate bikers. Devon's daughter, Margaret Rose, grew up hearing stories about her namesake. Brave, fierce, unafraid. At 5 years old, she announced she wanted to be a teacher like her daddy and a hero like Mrs. Brennan. Pearl Porter graduated high school with honors, got accepted to college on a teaching scholarship, came back to Ridgewood to teach 2nd grade. Every year, she told her students about the woman who climbed into a falling bus to save children. The Margaret Brennan Community Center hosted thousands of events, weddings, funerals, celebrations, memorials, moments of joy and moments of grief. And every morning at dawn, a Hells Angels rider walked the mountain road that Margaret had walked for 30 years. Different riders on different days, but always someone, because some things were too important to let go, because some legacies demanded to be remembered, because one woman had looked at the broken and the lost and the forgotten and seen what no one else could see. The capacity for good, the possibility of redemption, the truth that lives in every human heart waiting for someone brave enough to find it. 5 years after Margaret Brennan died, the movement had spread to 37 chapters. The Iron Cross was standard on every Reform Club's patch, a reminder, a promise, a symbol of fire that revealed instead of destroyed. The community center held its 5th anniversary celebration on a Saturday in spring. Governor Wilson came back, gave a speech about how one woman had changed an entire state, how compassion had accomplished what legislation never could. Mayor Whitmore, 10 years older, about to retire, stood at the podium and said the best decision he'd ever made was building this center, naming it after Margaret, learning that fear and understanding were choices. Sheriff Dawkins, gray now, months from retirement himself, told the story of a 76-year-old woman who'd stared him down, who'd protected 2 Hells Angels with nothing but moral authority, who'd taught him that justice and compassion weren't opposites. And Thorne, 57 now, still riding, still leading, still building. He stood at the podium and said what he said every year. She opened doors, she changed hearts, she saved us all. Then he looked at Colt, at Devon, at the hundreds of Hells Angels who'd adopted the model, at the thousands of lives touched by one woman's choice to help instead of walk away. And her work continues. Every day, every chapter, every man who chooses redemption over destruction. That's Margaret Brennan. That's her legacy. That's proof that one person can change the world. He paused. Let the silence settle. We ride with her symbol on our backs. We carry her lesson in our hearts. And we prove every single day that fire doesn't destroy. It reveals. He raised his hand. 400 voices answered. Fire reveals. The chant echoed off the mountains, strong, sure, eternal, inside the community center. In a place of honor, a photograph. Margaret Brennan, 76 years old, standing in the snow, surrounded by 14 Hells Angels and 15 rescued children, smiling, fierce, unafraid. The woman who'd dragged two men 400 yards through snow, the woman who'd climbed into a falling bus, the woman who'd taught broken men they were worth saving, the woman who'd changed everything. And below the photograph, in a case of glass and wood, the Iron Cross, Henry's final work, Margaret's symbol, the movement's reminder. Fire reveals. The words were engraved on a plaque beneath the cross. And every person who walked through those doors, every child, every adult, every broken person looking for hope, they saw it, they read it, they understood. Fire doesn't destroy. It reveals what was always there. Strength, courage, worth, the capacity for redemption, the possibility of change, the truth that it's never too late, never too broken, never too far gone. As long as you're breathing, as long as someone believes in you, as long as you're willing to walk through fire and see what emerges on the other side. That was Margaret Brennan's gift. That was her legacy. That was the truth she proved every single day of her 76 years. And in Ridgewood, Montana, in 37 Hells Angels chapters, in the hearts of everyone she'd touched, that truth lived on, would always live on. One person, one choice, one act of compassion at a time. Fire reveals, and Margaret Brennan had revealed heroes. The end.